This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
It just might be the greatest sports franchise in the history of sports. A place where legends are made, and there's always something to talk about. Get ready to immerse yourself in pinstripes. Start spreading the news, hosted by Paul Semendinger and E.J. Fagan, a couple of doctors with a prescription for Yankee fever. And now, here's Dr. Paul Semendinger and Dr. E.J. Fagan. Get ready to start spreading the news.
And happy Monday night, everyone. 9 p.m. here on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network. Paul Semendinger. Big breath here, along with my good friend, Dr. E.J. Fagan, who will be on in 1 second. Just a reminder that the Start Spreading the News program is brought to you by Artemisia Publishing, a great traditional publisher out of New Mexico. You can find their vast selection of books at apbooks.net. Want sports books? They've got them. Want coloring books? They've got them. Want fantasy books, fiction, you name it. They have such a large selection of great books, award-winning books, including a number written by me. But go to apbooks.net, and now let's welcome in the brilliant and the wonderful Dr. E.J. Fagan. Doctor, how are you today?
Doing wonderful, Paul.
Doctor, last week we did a really cool thing. We did a simulcast with the Bronx Beat podcast, and we weren't live. We did that on Sunday. So the Yankees had a pretty good week and not a great week, but they ended up splitting with the Blue Jays at the end. So a gut reaction to start. Do you feel the Yankees are on the right track, or do you feel the Yankees are on the wrong track?
I think they're pulling out of it. You know, I think there's still a few things that are kind of glaring problems. The bullpen, the injuries, right? I mean, I think the Stanton injury hurt a lot. He was really just kind of starting to hit pretty well. And then all the depth that they had got injured right before all those guys got injured. So you had Jason Dominguez go down, right? He'd be in the majors right now had he not gone down right before Stanton's injury and gone down for quite some time. He's now looking at late August as his timetable. And then the smaller one that I think kind of almost more important is Caleb Durbin, who I think probably would have been getting basically full playing time had he not been hit on the pitch, on the hand with a pitch. We don't actually have like a prognosis on him. No one's actually done any reporting there, which is a little annoying. But presumably he's out for another 3 or 4 weeks with a broken hand. So a lot of kind of things conspired to all go wrong at the same time. I think I'm kind of relieved, though, that it wasn't more long-term. So you didn't have Soto go down for the season or have to be a DH for the rest of the season or something like that. Judge just kind of barely missed a potentially very bad, hand injury. The long-term injuries have been Rizzo, who I think the Yankees are frankly better off without him, and Stanton, which is a loss, but hopefully he'll be back soon. He's already running a little bit apparently, and so who knows when he'll be back or when he'll have his timing back. But Stanton will probably be back in July at some point. So that's not bad news, really, all things considered. You look around the majors, and there's a lot of teams, contending teams, that are just worse off than the Yankees right now.
All right, so let's talk about Caleb Durbin. He was going to be the Yankees' second baseman. I think there was a point in time when it looked as though that maybe he'd be the better choice than Glaber, because Glaber was doing terribly. And then he didn't. I mean, what last week, Judge hits a big grand slam. Glaber comes up. It's a ground ball and basically loafs to first base. And then he gets benched for 2 days, comes back and has a pretty good series against the Blue Jays. So I'm going to read you some quick stats here. Glaber Torres 2023. And I already see that we're getting some comments, but I'm on a different screen right now. 2023, just last year, he hit 245 in March and April, 286 in May, and then in June, he hit only 198. Came back in July at 275. August, 327. September, October, 290. He seemed to be a second half player. Do you see the same kind of thing happening with Glaber in 2024?
Yeah, and look, he's always been that kind of streaky guy, and the streaks have been difficult to explain. A lot of times, players appear streaky because they're just unlucky. You have a bad 2 or 3 weeks and bad at ball luck or whatever, right? That's just kind of normal baseball. But Gleyber has gone into these deep slumps. I mean, 2022, I think August of 2022, Torres had like a 400 OPS or something like that. It was just awful. One of the worst stretches that I've ever seen a Yankee in. Very similar to this one, right? Nothing physically wrong with him. Still has all of his talent. We saw when he was playing shortstop, he had some big slumps like that too, and actually had some pretty bad numbers that year. And then the month after that, in 2022, he has one of his best months ever. And is one of the few players still hitting alongside Judge when Judge is chasing the home run record. And I think he was Judge's protection during that whole time. It's weird. I think that's just Gleyber Torres, right? I think Gleyber Torres mentally just gets into funks. And he started off the season in one. Contract year, a lot of pressure on him. And I think that the talent's still there. And I think the potential for him to snap out of it and have the kind of stretch that we saw him have in the second half of last year is still there, which is why you keep playing him. It's hard to play a guy who's playing so poorly. And I think benching him was the right move. And I think that Caleb Durbin would have gotten a shot had he been healthy because Torres was looking so bad. But I think the best possible scenario, hopefully, is now going to start playing out, which is Torres is back. He's an average to slightly below average defensive second baseman who could hit better than almost all of them. And that's what we got for basically a full season last year. Or at least I think the last 2/3 of the season or so, Torres was just really, really good. And I think that if that's the Torres that we get, I think you start talking about him as your number 4 hitter, your number 5 hitter, as a really important part of this lineup. And hopefully we're there.
If he is, I mean, that's a huge boost because in a general sense, as we look to everything else being equal, right? Every team has holes or whatever, but I don't care about every team. I'm looking at the Yankees. Ben Rice seems to be holding down first base adequately. I don't know if he's going to hit for power. That could be a problem. Second base has not been good. Gleyber hasn't been good. We're going to talk about Volpe in a minute, and that's Angelo's question as well. Third base has been a disaster. Verdugo in left has been better than we thought, but his OPS plus is under 100 because he can't hit lefties. Judge has been fine. Soto's been fine. The catching has not been fine. The DH hasn't been fine. And so there's a lot of holes, and you can't fill them all at the trade deadline. And as we noted, as you noted, the help in the minor leagues isn't there for a variety of reasons, including Caleb Durbin getting hit on the hand with a pitch and being out for now weeks on end. So you really need some of those positions to fix themselves. Maybe Ben Rice hits well enough to be the everyday first baseman. It seems like he might be able to do that. If Gleyber Torres can come back and be a productive player, well, that solves that problem. And all of a sudden, the Yankees are starting around the edges to look like a much better team than they were really for the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and look, unlike, say, like a DJ LeMahieu, I don't think there's any reason to believe he won't come around. He's always done it, right? He's always come out of his slump and been a very productive hitter when he's going well. And the slump started at the beginning of the season. It went on for longer than normal. There was a period in May where we were saying, really,
he was coming out of it.
He was coming out of it, but he never went on like a hot streak. He just kind of hit well, steady and well. And then he went into an even deeper slump in June. And I see no reason to believe he's not going to come out of it. Whereas with a LeMahieu, he's 35 years old or 36 years old. Like, it wouldn't shock me at all if LeMahieu never hit 200 again. I think there's other reasons why you try to play LeMahieu and try to get him to see if he's any good. But if I'm looking for a long-term replacement or even a short-term replacement, LeMahieu is the one I'm trying to replace for that same reason. Or if I'm trying to upgrade a DH or whatever, right? Or a platoon partner for Verdugo. Those all make much more sense than Torres. I want to talk about Ben Rice, though, really quickly, because I just think he's looked great. He's just missed 2 or 3 home runs. He had a double the other night, which would have been a home run in, I think, a half of Major League ballparks. He's commanding the strike zone. He's really good at working counts. He's been good against lefties and righties. He has a 400 xWOBA on the season. It's early, you don't have that much of a sample, but that's really impressive. He has more walks than strikeouts on the season. I think he looks like a hitter. He looks like a hitter who's physically and athletically talented and doesn't have a lot of experience at first base. That weird, I don't know if you saw the weird roller down the foul line that he should have picked up that cost the Yankees an out and a run or a couple of runs.
You know what? And I get the idea he should have picked it up. And he was in the wrong position at that time. That was a crazy inning. There were a lot of weird things that happened. And you know what? I played a lot of baseball in my life. 99% of the time, maybe 100% of the time, you just say that ball's going foul. I'm not going to touch it because it's going to go foul. And it just didn't.
And look, it's an experience thing, right? I think maybe Rizzo picks that ball up because he's played a lot more innings there at first base. I think Rice has the physical ability to play first base well. I think we've seen that. We've seen him get to some balls that are hit pretty hard. We've seen him basically be an athletic player. And I think that's the nice thing about a player who's young. Like maybe when Rice is Rizzo's age, he won't look very athletic at first base, but he's not Rizzo's age. He's 25, right? So he still has the ability to adapt a little bit, to play out there. And I think that I think his ability at the plate looks real. He looks like the guy who hit as well as he did over the last 2 years. Like this is not someone who just came out of nowhere. This is somebody who really hit in the minors. And when we talked about him right before he came up, what we said was the question is defense. Can he play first base? Can he translate what he did in the minors to the majors? So some guys who take a lot of pitches in the minors that just never translates to the majors because major league hitters can throw strikes. That's not Ben Rice. Like I think Ben Rice is legitimate, is a hitter. I also like that he caught one inning. They just kind of remind him like, oh yeah, he has catching gear. I don't think he's going to catch a lot. He's a worse catcher than Wells. He's a worse catcher than Trevino. He's not a solution to any of the Yankees' defensive catching problems. But he's a third catcher. That could be useful.
I love, let me just take a break there for a second. I love the idea of having three guys who are legitimate catchers, who really know how to catch, who catch through their minor league days. Because I think it's, if you have Johnny Bench or Yogi Berra, okay, you don't need three catchers. But if you just have a collection of guys who are it's nice being able then to say I can pinch hit for one or pinch run for one or do something and not be stuck with this situation where if the guy I put in to replace the regular catcher gets hurt, then we're up the creek. Who's going to catch? Oswaldo Cabrera or something? Guy who's never done it. I mean, that's just doomsday. It's nice having that third guy on the roster. Jim Leyritz was like that for a while. He caught a lot, but he was sort of like the emergency catcher in some of those years. He wasn't the backup guy. He was like, hey, if we need a catcher, we got Leyritz. He can catch, but he's really not a great catcher. So I love having that kind of depth.
I agree. And so, I mean, I think that, look, Rizzo's going to be out for a little bit. I will have a real report card on Rice when it's time to make that decision. But I don't think it'd be shocking at all to me if the Yankees end up going with Rice as your primary first baseman, not just the rest of the year, but long term. I think that's really a possibility. And I have confidence that he'll be a better defensive first baseman after he gets more reps.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, absolutely.
By the way, did you catch the story of how they scouted him? I think this is a broadcast thing. So Rice was in the Ivy League during COVID, so he wasn't playing. 2020, 2021, there was no organized baseball for him to play. And so he and a bunch of friends, he's from the Boston area, who are all athletes, kind of got together and were scrimmaging in the park in Boston, basically. And Damon Oppenheimer, who's the head of Yankees scouting, was in town to watch his son play hockey. And just heard that there's some college guys, who were scrimmaging and just went over to see and saw Ben Rice and saw how good he was. And basically stored that fact away. I'm sure had a conversation with him. And the Yankees knew that they could draft him because no one else knew about this guy. He hadn't played anywhere. They knew they could draft him basically. I think it was in the 12th round. And they did. And they picked him up. And they were the only people in the world who knew that this guy was a special hitter.
That's awesome. What a
pretty cool. Yeah.
One of my three sons, like the old TV show, one of the three sons in my family that I fathered, lives in Cambridge. And every year in September, they have what's called the old time baseball game. It's regular baseball. It's not like 1860s rules or anything, but it's just like a regular baseball game. And it seems like every year, or at least most years, a former Red Sox shows up and just plays it. And I haven't been able to be there at the right time. Life hasn't put us in that circumstance, but one of these days I want to be there and go to that thing because that sounds just like that story you told.
Well, I mean, Bryce Harper, when he was young in Washington D.C., used to go play wiffle ball on the mall with people, which was kind of fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, look, I think it's a good origin story. We'll see how Ben Rice does. He's still new, but I think now that I heard that he kind of came out of nowhere last year. It makes a lot of sense. No scouts had eyes on him, and all of a sudden the Yankees found a guy who had some really special hitting talent. And maybe if he gets to play 2 full college seasons, then he gets drafted pretty high. But he doesn't. So big fan of Ben Rice. I have a question about Ben Rice we're going to maybe talk about later, but we'll table that for now.
All right. So quickly, do you see Glaber as a Yankee in 2025? He's a free agent.
No, I don't.
I don't either.
I think that there was a world before the season started where I said maybe they offer him a qualifying offer. I think it's $22 million next year, which is more than he'll get on average. He would have gotten on an average annual value, but for a 1-year deal for 28-year-old, it might make sense for the Yankees to do it. It might make sense for Glaber to accept. I don't think we're in that world anymore. I think they declined off from a qualifying offer, even if he finishes the season really strong, because it's a lot of money for Glaber Torres. You still got to replace him though.
Yes.
Caleb Durbin is my name. I like Durbin a lot. He's got some really special qualities to him. He's a weird player that I like, but I also want to see him before I would commit to that and not go get a free agent this offseason. Otherwise, you could end up with no second baseman next year.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, the Yankees have to, they're the ones. Brian Cashman's got the wall with all the names on it and all the players and who's available and who's not available and who's on what team and what their statistics are and who's in what minor league system and et cetera. But all things being equal, I don't see Glaber Torres being a Yankee next year. I also don't see Anthony Rizzo being a Yankee. Nope. And I agree with you. Ben Rice could be that guy. Again, I think first base is one of the concerns the Yankees may have for the second half of this year, but I think Ben Rice is showing that he can hit. We'll see if he hits for power, and if he doesn't hit for power, that could be problematic because first base is usually a power position. But I think we're seeing the changing of the guard, both for good and bad, on the right side of the Yankee infield as we finish 2024, hopefully heading into the postseason and beyond, and going to 2025.
I think it's a good thing, too. The Yankees need to get cheaper at positions. And Ben Rice doesn't have to be an all-star to be really valuable to this team. Because if he's making the league minimum, he's in his mid-20s. If you get, Anthony Rizzo was not an all-star with the Yankees, right? He was a guy who was hovering around 800 OPS when he was on and was valuable. And his left-handed hitter, Ben Rice, I can imagine hitting some home runs in Yankee Stadium.
Bulks up. Don Mattingly wasn't a big home run hitter in his minor league days and when he first came up.
But that allows you to go out and sign someone for more money somewhere. It allows you to eat a LeMahieu or a Stanton contract because you're paying someone less than $1 million, and you're paying them that for a while.
All right, so
if you add Caleb Durbin, all of a sudden it gets real easy to fit in an Alex Bregman or something like that.
And we might be talking about Alex Bregman, though I think because the Astros are playing so well, he's out of the discussion. But for this year. So let's talk about Anthony Volpe. He just finished up a really bad June.
Yeah.
His batting average was 220. But I've been getting pushback on start spreading the news about this. He doesn't walk. He walked 3 times in the month of June. He's your leadoff hitter. His on-base percentage is 238. And I mentioned that, and some people are making comments, which is fine. You can make comments, but they're absolutely so far wrong. I can be wrong about things. Your leadoff hitter with a 238 on-base percentage is bad. And then he gets a single like, oh, he had 2 hits today. I guess he doesn't walk enough, which is just absurd. He walked 3 times in the month of June. That just can't be, right? What am I missing here?
No, you're not missing anything. I think you're missing is that there's no one else.
Well, right? That's a different story. Yeah, I agree with you.
I think if Anthony Volpe is your 7 hitter, he starts to look like a really valuable player. I think he would actually walk a little more. No one's throwing strikes in front of Soto and Judge. No one's throwing balls in front of Soto and Judge. When he started the season, you might remember the first 2 or 3 weeks where he was batting lower in the order. He was walking a ton, and I think and he was working counts, and I think that was because people were trying to pitch a little bit and not just throw strikes. you
No,
can't
I'm going to
steal.
push back on that a little bit because some people have said, like, well, of course they're going to throw strikes to him. And I think they were saying those comments during the game when it was Garrett Cole's second start and he's walking like 57 guys and he walked the bases loaded. We all want to throw strikes, but we don't always throw every pitcher. You can't just throw strikes all the time. And they're yes, they're trying to throw strikes to him because he's batting in front of Soto and Judge. But if you're only walking 3 times, that's not just on the pitchers because there's a lot of bad pitchers that can't throw strikes.
Well, Soto, I mean, not Soto, a good hitter needs to punish pitchers who don't throw out of the strike zone. And Volpe has not been able to do that. I still think he gets a little more leeway lower in the order. It's not a huge difference. Look, I think that Volpe was probably getting a little lucky in May in terms of batted ball luck. His ex-WOBA has been pretty consistent all season. It's been right around 300, maybe a little bit below 300, which is below average, well below average. Now, he has been a great player because he is one of the best defensive players in baseball. Him and Bobby Witt Jr. are going back and forth all season for best pitcher in baseball, best defensive player in baseball. He's a good base runner, which also adds a little bit of value. And he's a good enough hitter that he's not a complete black hole like he was at times last year. I'm a little worried that this new version of Anthony Volpe, this is about as good as you get. He doesn't have a power swing anymore. He's substituted power for strikeouts. And that means that he's basically like Isaiah Kiner-Falefa with the bat. Now, look,
you play a little better shortstop was a better arm.
Right. I mean, look, and Anthony Volpe is a better defender and is on the first page of Fangraph's WAR because he is such a good defender.
This was you saw the question from Angelo, but this is what we're talking about. On EJ's Bronx Beat podcast, he had a concern regarding Volpe in the leadoff. If you had to create a batting order based on those in the 90s, how would you construct it? Assume Stanton and Rizzo available. I don't quite get that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure, Angelo, what you're asking here. But here, let me ask what I think you're asking. It's like, who else would lead off?
Yeah,
especially when Stan comes back, where would you put everybody? And you have this kind of righty-lefty problem that because Soto is a number 2 hitter and Judge is a number 3 hitter, that you have this like weird, you have to have a righty leading off, which kind of limits your options. I think they want LeMahieu to be that guy, and maybe he's going to start to come around. I think if you see it for another week or two, I think you're willing to put it there. I think of the current players on the roster, I think the most likely other leadoff guys are Verdugo against righties.
I agree.
Or Ben Rice.
Interesting. I was thinking you were going to say that. I don't know.
I mean, Rice is the only other hitter that I would say I think has a chance to be a good on base guy. Now he's a lefty, which means that you probably don't want to put him next to Soto. But you just don't have a lot of other really good right-hand options. You got Gleyber Torres, who even when he's on doesn't really fit kind of the on-base leadoff.
And they've tried that on and off throughout his career. We'll make you the leadoff hitter, and it just doesn't work.
He was the leadoff hitter on opening day this year, right? So there's not an obvious option. I think in a perfect world, Volpe would be a better hitter, but that's just not happening. And I think we were all fooled a little bit by that. So Angela asked about batting orders in the 90s were different than today. In the 90s, Volpe would be the leadoff guy because he steals bases, right? And they wouldn't look so hard at his on base percentage. That
in the
was
90s
bad.
and before throughout the history of baseball, right? It's in the 90s that we got a different look at what a lineup looks like.
And I just think that was the wrong way to construct a lineup. I mean, especially just think about, we talk about you don't want to steal bases for a Judge and Soto because they might hit a home run, sure. But also Soto walks, which is a risk-free stolen base, right? Like if Soto walks or Judge walks, you're on second base anyway. And you're not doing a lot of like hit and runs and stuff like that with Soto. The Soto, frankly, I think could be good at that kind of baseball.
And Soto hits a lot of singles.
He's got that very flat swing, which is why he's so good. But I think that was the wrong decision in the 90s. I think it makes sense to put an on-base guy in front of them. And just think about having to throw strikes to Soto because you have a guy in first in front of you. When Volpe was on, that was a great formula, right? When Volpe was in that hitting streak and he was on base all the time in front of the two of them, that was really nice for Soto. But now we have a situation where there's a little less line of protection. Verdugo isn't very hot right now. There's really there's no incentive for pitchers to pitch to both of them. That Judge has still been great despite of that. He's It's been incredible despite of that. But I do think that if you had a better leadoff hitter there, it would really matter. I think LeMahieu is your only really realistic option right now, and that means he needs to stay hot.
Let me give you one. There's one guy who is among the all-time greats in getting on base on the Yankees right now, Juan Soto.
It's not a bad idea, honestly. I mean, Soto, you would lead off. You'd have Judge batting second. And then you could put a lefty third, right? And
I never loved the idea of the big guy batting second because I'm just married to the old-fashioned Thurman Munson batted third because he was your best hitter. Babe Ruth batted third because he was your best hitter. I get that whole thing. That's more just like, I don't like the way it looks, but this is what baseball does now because it probably makes more sense. I get it. And Judge has been a number 2 hitter. So if
Mike Trout has been a leadoff guy before. I mean, if you look at the Dodgers, they'll often have a lineup like that. I don't think it's a bad idea.
Why not lead off Juan Soto?
I think the one reason not to is that Soto hits home runs too.
No, so did Ricky.
Right? Like, sure, but like Soto hits more.
That's true.
I think I would prefer, again, LeMahieu becoming the second half of last year hitter we saw.
I don't think he's ever coming back.
I don't think so either, but I think that it's been a little like a short enough time period that I think it's okay to keep trying it for a little bit longer. And then you have to make a decision at the trade deadline, right? I mean, I think that makes sense. But that's why I don't think Volpe is moving to the leadoff spot until there's some resolution here. But if you had Soto leading off, Judge second, I'd guess you could put Ben Rice third. Verdugo. I mean, you still kind of have the line of protection problem there, and then you have to figure out who's batting ninth, right? And so it's hard to tell. I think that you're trying to solve a problem that you have an imbalanced lineup. Yeah, you have the 2 best hitters in baseball, and
everybody
not
else.
A lot else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not uncommon today. Like a lot of top teams have this lineup depth problem, but they have a little bit more. So you think about facing the Braves. The Braves had a lot of struggling hitters when we faced them, but they had guys who are struggling below their career norms, but were still effective baseball players. Whereas the Yankees have a lot of guys who, frankly, are not hitting well enough to be major league players. Austin Wells, I've been really disappointed in. I thought he looked really good to start the season and has just kind of lost it in the last month or so. We talk about Gleyber Torres. I think Trevino has been a little weaker lately. You got a lot of Oswaldo Cabrera at bats. We talked about LeMahieu. Verdugo has really been bad lately. Some of that's been they faced a lot of lefties, and that's not really been their advantage. But I also just think that there's just a lot of players who are looking kind of old. And I think Stan coming back and coming back as the player he was in the 2 or 3 weeks before he got injured would be really a big deal. I think Torres coming back would be a big deal. I think Rice would be a big deal. So there's potential there. And also you have the 2 best hitters in baseball, which is like, that's a good, I mean, not just the 2 best hitters in baseball. Aaron Judge might be the best hitter ever right now.
No, we're going to talk about that in a little while. Yeah. All right. So all right. I just saw something as I'm getting ready for the next question, and I don't know why. I should have known this, but my brain just exploded. So, quick quiz. I'm going to give you a different quick quiz that has nothing to do with baseball. Because when I'm writing my Gettysburg book, which I met my publisher last week, and it's going to come out in the fall of volume 1 of a 3-part Gettysburg series. More on that later. But one of the guys I wrote about in volume 1 is Custer. And Custer has his last stand. What state? And if you don't know, just say I don't feel like answering this. I'm not trying to trick you because I did not know. I had a thought of where Little Big Horn was. So it was
against the Lakota Indians. So the Lakota Indians were there, which was the Dakota Indians. But I think that's a different Dakota. So I think Montana.
Yes, for my whole life. Oh yeah, Battle of Little Bighorns in South Dakota. No, I researched it.
I'll tell you if you're interested, and everybody listening, there's a wonderful podcast, one of my favorite podcasts called The Rest is History. 2 British historians, and they like to go. They're storytellers. They really have fun with history in a way that I really enjoy. And they did, I believe, 7 or 8 episodes on Custer, on Crazy Horse, on the Lakota Indians. It was just really incredible. And it's a cool story. Custer is a real character. I mean, there's a reason why his command of a bunch of American troops who lost a battle is still something that like children know about today because he was a real character in his time.
And a major player in the Battle of Gettysburg.
Major player that could battle Gettysburg, major like general in the Union Army. I mean, really what was a protege of Ulysses S. Grant. And then after the war becomes a protege of Andrew Johnson, essentially on the other side. Big dashing guy, wore fancy outfits, had big hair. It really just fascinating character. And also a character that when you read his biography, you understand why he would get all of his men killed.
Yes. Yeah. Well, flamboyant to a fault. So here's the question, because I didn't feel like getting off on a tangent there. But listen, like the lesson there is like, no matter how much you think you know, there's always something else that you don't know. And certain things that we sometimes take as facts, of course, Little Bighorns in South Dakota, of course it is, because it just has to be. All of a sudden you realize like, it's in Montana. And I've asked that to a lot of smart people, people who know history, people who've studied history. And I'd say half of them know it's in Montana. My parents visited it. Little Bighorn. They've traveled the entire country. They're very smart people. And as I recall, one of them was like, South Dakota. I'm like, no. And the other was like, yeah, it's in Montana. But like, it's just one of those weird things. I never knew it was in Montana. But anyway, here's the question that relates to baseball. How old is Vladdy Guerrero Jr.?
I think he's 24.
He's 25. Like yeah. I'm thinking he's 30. He
was really young when he came up in 2021, I think.
Been around forever. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you, he's now a free agent. I'm not a free agent, but he is on the block, supposedly. He always said, I would never want to play for the Yankees. I hate the Yankees. I don't appreciate what they did to my dad or whatever, because they were going to sign him, but they didn't sign him, and they signed Gary Sheffield instead, whatever that was all about. But I now forgive the Yankees, and I would go to the Yankees. And I've been saying, no, I do not want Vlad Guerrero. He's an underachiever. He should be so much better. And I figured he was like moving past his prime. There's no way he's only 25 years old. He had to be 28 or 29. So Montana and South Dakota, and Vladdy Guerrero is years younger than I thought he was. If he's available, do you want Vlad Guerrero?
100%. And I've been thinking, I'm probably going to write a blog post about this, because what would I trade for Vlad Guerrero? He's got one more year after this. He's having a really strong season right now. His xWOBA is even higher than his actual numbers, but his actual numbers are great, right? 840 OPS, 300 batting average, pretty bad defense. I see that comment from Angelo, which is Vlad cut his hair to enjoy, and he really gets traded to New York. I think he wants to be traded to New York, right? I think that's exactly what this is all about. He's in a little bit better shape. Look, when he came up, he was a young man.
I was just, you know what, EJ, you're saying the same thing. I was just going to say, look, if we're going to hold what we say at 21 against us for the rest of our lives, like, and tell me if this isn't true, and then we can talk about your book for a minute, because you wrote, and I don't want to get into politics and divisiveness and this side and that side and all that, and we're not going to do that. But, in politics, we say, oh, well, that's a smart person. His view changed over time or he or she learned about the issue and grew and matured and figured it out. And then sometimes, like we say, oh, they changed their mind, they're waffling, or they're not consistent. But don't we all want to change our mind as we learn more and figure things out differently? And don't we say things when we're younger that aren't necessarily smart?
This is baseball, right? This is a sport. Who cares? Right? Like, I mean, look, Guerrero, he was 21 years old. He is the son of a Hall of Famer. He was coming up and was having an MVP season the moment he hit the major leagues. I don't think we should be surprised that he had some fighting words against his division rival. That is normal. And now he's a little bit older. He's the same age as Juan Soto, which is incredible.
It's crazy.
Incredible. Right. And like, he now maybe thinks that some of that structure and rules and Yankee mystique is a good thing, because he's watched his team in Toronto underachieve every year he's been there. I think Vlad Guerrero wants to be a Yankee. I think that the Yankees could conceivably trade for him. I think Toronto is going to trade him. It is the time to try to trade him, or at least see what the offers are for him. They don't have to do it. because he's not going to resign in Toronto. He's going to resign for a whole lot of money. And he's a really good baseball player. And I think he'd make the Yankees a better team.
All right, now he's a first baseman. I read somewhere, I think Tim Cable has an article, that's where I read it, in his article for tomorrow on Start Spreading the News, the 6 a.m., that he even said he'd go to third base. So let's just work. Let me hear how you work through this. I want Ben Rice playing first base the rest of the year if he's going to just continue at his level of performance, even though I wish he would have a little more power. But I want him to grow and be a first baseman and be our first baseman for the next 10 years, hopefully. So Vladdy's a first baseman. He could also DH, but Stanton is coming back. So how do you fix all that?
I think you trade Ben Rice for him.
No.
I don't think Vlad Guerrero is a third baseman. He was one of the worst third basemen in baseball, which is why they moved him to first base.
And that's why I didn't make that part of the equation.
Right. So I think that look, Vlad Guerrero Jr. is not going to be a cheap guy to trade for. He's got a year and a half left on his contract. He's a top tier player having a top tier season. Ideally, he's a DH, but I think he's okay enough at first base. He's not going to embarrass you there, that you stomach it and you take the offense. And you got to give up something good for him. And I think it makes a lot of sense for Toronto. It makes a lot of sense for the Yankees. The Yankees trade their young, cost-controlled, somewhat uncertain first baseman for an older, really good, much more certain, more expensive, shorter-term first baseman. I think that's a classic trade. I think it gets it done. I think Ben Rice can be the centerpiece for that trade. So yeah, I that's the trade I offer.
Wow.
Yep.
How old is Ben Rice?
He's 25, which is also crazy, right? Yeah. College players, right? I mean, look, Ben Rice.
I'm blown away that Vlad Guerrero is 25.
Yeah, and Juan Soto is the same age as Ben Rice.
Yeah, but I knew Juan Soto was 25.
Right.
Like that was part of the whole thing. Like, of course I want him. He's 25.
Well, and remember, Guerrero's not a free agent. Right?
My world is
so he'll be a 27-year-old free agent. Look, I think that Vlad Guerrero Jr. is a special hitter. I think he has underperformed since his rookie season, maybe because Toronto is an underachieving ball club in general. And I think that he would be a really important right-handed hitter to balance out an increasingly left-handed lineup. The Yankees have trouble against left-handed pitching. I'll just look at his splits really quickly against left-handed pitching. I'm going to guess they're pretty good. He's been a little bit better against left-handed pitching this year, though he's fairly even. Last year against left-handed pitching, last year against left-handed pitching, he's actually about the same. So he doesn't have strong platoon splits, but I think it's important for the Yankees to have another right-handed hitter. I think he transforms your lineup. He's immediately the fourth or fifth hitter in the lineup. And you figure things out later if you have a chance to get Guerrero. I'm not sure the Blue Jays are going to want to trade him in the division. I've never really understood that logic, but baseball teams adhere to it anyway. I think that's a deal that could very well happen.
Well, 38 minutes ago, I'm writing the questions, things we're going to talk about. I'm like, I do not want Vlad Guerrero. I have changed my mind. See, I've waffled, I've flip-flopped and all that kind of stuff because I did not know he was 25.
I mean, look at the numbers are incredible. Like, look at his StatCast page. It looks like Judge and Soto a lot. I mean, he looks like a video game character who's maxed out on everything.
And here's the thing. Now, all of a sudden, you've got three great hitters. Yep. Like three super great hitters. And Vlad has always underachieved. And that's one reason I think we talked about this before the season. I didn't see Toronto as a big team because Vlad always seems to underachieve. But when you're brought to a team and there's Soto and Judge, you don't have to be the only guy. You don't have to be the big guy. You're just part of the process. So here's the crazy question. If you get Guerrero, do you flip-flop Judge and Soto in the lineup?
I think you have to. I think you have to, right? Because I think that it makes sense to have the lefty of your three elite hitters in the middle of the two right-handers.
Yeah, I don't like because I never like Stanton and Judge back-to-back. It just bothers me. And it
I guess lefties, I'm okay with it, but I mean, look, the Yankees should have another good lefty, especially a lefty who's not really bad against lefties like Verdugo. So yeah, no, I think this is a trade that could happen. I really do, and I think it would be Ben Rice. And you know, if you think about from the Blue Jays' perspective, they're about to rebuild. This version of the Blue Jays is not going to be a playoff team. They've been really injured this season, and they've had some guys underperform, but they have really valuable assets in Guerrero and in Bo Bichette. And I think that both of those guys are gone, and they're going to try to get good, young, major league ready guys ready so they can try again. They also have some pitchers they might trade too. Mm-hmm.
Do you throw? I'm very convinced that this is like the window closes after this year for the Yankees. Like it's going to be very hard for them to compete. But if they have Vlad Guerrero Jr. 26,
and if they re-sign Soto,
of course, I think they will. I can't. Hal Steinbrenner talks about I don't want to spend money and I don't have to need $300 million. You can't do it. And he bothers me when you hear we signed Soto and we're not done yet. We're going big, and then nothing happens. And you're like, oh, we got this guy off the scrap heap, and that kind of stuff drives me crazy. But he's not. He knows the Yankee brand, and he knows that it's important for Yankee fans to have the superstar players, and not just have them. He knows Yankee fans are still mad they never got Bryce Harper. He gets all. He's smart enough, and he is a smart man. Obviously, he's a businessman. He's worth billions of dollars. He understands that fans are still angry about that. But we never had Bryce Harper. We just wanted him. We have the fans have Juan Soto. You can't have it and then take it away. And so I think Soto's coming back. And then if you could have him and Guerrero and Judge, that all of a sudden the window doesn't close in 2025, because that's a tough team to beat just on that.
You hate to get into a player's head because you don't really know what's going on in there, but Soto feels like he's enjoying it here. Mm-hmm. And this is a guy who was with a dysfunctional club in San Diego for 2 years. I think he knows the risk of just choosing whatever baseball club offers him the most money. The Yankees are going to offer him a lot of money, and just like Aaron Judge, you know, it's going to be about where do I want to live? You know, where do I want to play baseball for the rest of my life? I think he looks at Mike Trout and says Trout made the wrong decision. And I think Shohei Ohtani made the right decision. He said, I'm going to leave him to go somewhere else. So look, maybe some team offer it. Maybe the Mets want to offer him another $200 million on top of the next best team, whatever. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that Soto's going to make more money than any player in baseball history. And I think I think the Yankees are the favorites to sign him. But then you're right. If you're talking about a mid-20s Soto, a mid-20s Guerrero, Volpe, you know, maybe they don't have to trade Ben Rice to get, maybe they trade Spencer Jones and instead of Ben Rice or something like that to get Guerrero. You're talking about a team that is really well positioned to contend for a while. Especially, look, Aaron Judge isn't slowing down. Right. So maybe there will be a time when Aaron Judge is no longer an elite hitter, but I don't think it's next year. I think we can say for now, Aaron Judge is still at the very, very top of his game. There are hitters, Hall of Fame hitters, who did their best work in their 30s. And Judge might be that guy who's an elite hitter way longer than most players. His physical size helps. And the fact that he still has some athleticism to give up helps. And, so I'm not willing to say that this is, World Series or bust this year, but they certainly should spend prospects they have sitting in the minors in order to fill out this team.
Yes. I think it's closer to World Series or bust, especially if they don't do something big and dramatic. And boy, oh boy, Vlad Guerrero is something big and dramatic. And boy, oh boy, wouldn't that be fun? It's 25 years old. I'm still shocked. All right. So tell us, EJ, how is your book going and what's happening?
Well, the book is called The Thinkers, The Rise of Partisan Think Tanks and the Polarization of American Politics. Has nothing about baseball in there. You are warned. It's going well. As far as I can tell, it's selling well. We don't get numbers all that often. I think I get them at the end of the quarter.
Yeah, that's how I get them too. You find out at the end of the quarter.
Yeah, but it's sold out on Amazon. It is now back in stock on Amazon. So if you are interested in this book, The Thinkers is in stock on Amazon. It's gotten some early reviews from some professors who are thinking about assigning it to their undergraduate classes, and they think it is appropriate for undergraduates, which is not the case for most academic books. which are written for robots for the most part, or for no one to ever actually read. My book is not like that. So it's a fun read. It's still, fair warning, it's a scientific book. It is a book with, it is not a light read, but it is a lighter read than most books in this genre. It's also less conspiratorial than other books in the genre.
Nice. I know Mike Whiteman, the wonderful Mike Whiteman. He might be watching. Hope he is. Has a copy and was reading through parts of it and told me I haven't read it yet. It was like, yeah, this is good stuff. This is really a good
nice.
book.
Well, thank you, Mike, and leave a 5-star review when you're done with it. That's
That's
I don't think those reviews really matter all that much, but 5-star review would be wonderful.
Yeah, 5-star reviews don't matter except for our egos and things. And I think it does help other people buy books, so I do think they matter. But yes, we love 5-star reviews. They are the best. So I was going to ask you another question about the book. Oh, Tevi Troy, have you?
Tevi Troy, friend of the show, friend of my podcast, will be is currently reading it and will be probably writing a review for the National Review, which is fun because the National Review is kind of one of the minor characters in the book, so it's kind of fun to have it in there.
That is awesome. That is awesome. All right, so the Tuesday discussion tomorrow for the writers at Start Spreading the News centers around this idea that Judge is like ascending all these lists. He's performing at a level that's just absurd. And it's not now just one season of this, it's multiple seasons of this. And if he doesn't get hurt last year, oh my goodness, it might be 3 straight, like unheard of, otherworldly seasons. So I make the point in the question that the Yankees Mount Rushmore is Gehrig, Ruth, DiMaggio, Mantle. They are the 4 greatest Yankee players. I think it's hard to argue they're not the most iconic Yankee players as well. You can't tell the story of baseball without mentioning all 4 of them. They're bigger than the game. They're bigger than life. They're almost characters of themselves. The question then becomes, who's the next 4? What? And maybe you'll disagree with me, say DiMaggio doesn't belong or something, but I just think it's hard to make that argument. So who would be the next 4? And is Aaron Judge ascended into that category already?
Okay, so your top 4 are Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue them.
Yeah, I mean, I let me argue them for a second.
Mariano Rivera.
I am biased toward modern players in these discussions. Not just because, if you were to have a time machine and go grab Babe Ruth, he probably couldn't hit today, right? That's not what I mean. The competition is harder today. That is that the spread between the best players and the worst players is tighter than it used to be. So if you look at stats from Babe Ruth's era, there's a decent number of players who put up stats that are just impossible today, including Babe Ruth. So you look at like a Jimmy Fox stat line, or a Ted Williams or Gehrig, and they're just the numbers are off the charts.
Rogers Hornsby's a guy people forget about, but I think over a 3-year period he batted 400.
I mean, look at Honus Wagner, look at Ty Cobb, look at Cy Young, look at Walter Johnson. That would be impossible today. It's impossible not just because you can just imagine these guys would be trained better. So that's not the way I think about it, because there's just more. The low end player is better than they used to be. So I'm assuming that Babe Ruth saw some really bad pitchers and feasted on them, right? And destroyed them. He probably destroyed some pretty good pitchers too. He was a very, very good player, one of the best ever. But when I look at stats from back in the day, what I try to do is I try to mentally deflate them a lot. I actually did an article for Baseball Prospectus years ago where I did this, where I just adjusted for the variance, basically the spread of players in every given baseball year. And there was a fascinating discussion because it wasn't just linear. It wasn't that the variance was high back in the day and low today. Variance in baseball kind of goes a little bit like this. And one of the times that variance increases is during the steroids era. So there are players who are able to stand out more than other players, both on the pitching and hitting side during the steroids era. Why might that be? Obviously, they were taking steroids. So you could have a Barry Bonds put up the numbers that he did at that time when 10% of players are juicing, right? And that allows those players to stand out. And maybe it allows some pitchers to stand out as well, Roger Clemens, right, et cetera. And maybe some of those pitchers weren't juicing, who knows? Back in the day,
Has anybody ever accused Pedro of juicing?
No, and who knows if he did
we
or
talked
not?
about that a couple weeks ago. Like his couple of years, I think that was last week. Ranked with any pitcher.
Yeah, and I don't want to accuse any individual players at all, but the variance was higher. And that may not just have been juicing, right? It could have been other things. For example, Greg Maddux had a reputation with umpires before umpires were evaluated fairly that allowed him to throw in the opposite batter's box and get a strike all the time in a way that is absurd. That's also a way you can stand out. And I suspect Pedro, if we went back and reviewed the tape, would have very similar advantages. And you can imagine other ways that players can stand out. And that was true back in the Ruth and Gehrig days and true today. Now, the question is does that push any of them off of Mount Rushmore? I don't think it pushes Mantle off of Mount Rushmore at all. Mantle was playing during a highly competitive time. So he's an easy one. But Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, I think it's a fair question if there was real competition. But who actually in Yankee history, as a Yankee, has that ability to push those guys off? Maybe Jeter. I think there's an argument for Jeter, but Jeter is a solid Hall of Famer. He is not an inner circle Hall of Famer.
Those four guys are. They're all inner circle Hall of Famer.
I mean, I think you could have a Jeter DiMaggio argument, and if you wanted to kind of have this discussion, I think I don't think it's a crazy idea. Yogi Berra, I think, is probably the player that I would say is the next best Yankee.
I was just talking about Yogi with my son Ethan the other day. I'm not pulling up his page because we were at 951 or whatever. But I believe every year from 1947 through 1964, he received Hall of Fame votes. And then for 7 straight years, he was in the top 4. And for 6 of those years, he was in the top
MVP.
3 MVP votes.
Yep.
I mean, he wasn't just great. He was phenomenal, and the baseball world saw him as such.
So I think Yogi is the first player I would start to talk about bumping Gehrig or DiMaggio off for.
I can't believe you take Gehrig off. Okay, but go on.
I think in a vacuum, I take Berra over Gehrig is probably my guess, but it's hard. After that, I think it's Jeter, right? After that's Mariano. So that's 8 players. I don't know. Now, does Judge?
So the question is, does
Judge
not
way to judge off? No, not yet.
Not yet. Right. Okay.
Mariano is probably the next one you start to talk about. Mariano Rivera is a almost 60 win player over the course of his career. Judge might end up there.
How are we at 8? I think we're only at 7. Mariano. We're adding Mariano.
Top 4.
Yogi.
Berra, Berra, Jeter, Mariano. Okay, that's so 8 might be Judge. So who's Judge's competition? Willie Randolph, Whitey Ford, Willie Randolph, Roy White,
Thurman.
I think I take Judge over those guys.
Over Whitey Ford.
I think so too. I think I would. Whitey Ford's a little overrated, I'll be honest. If you look at his numbers, they're good. They are in the Hall of Fame good. They are not. He was not one of the top 5 pitchers of his lifetime. So I think there's an argument. I think I would take Judge. What I'm projecting Judge to end at.
Well, that's a different story. I'm
so
saying
if he retired today, I don't know. I mean, look, Judge is interesting because he's had so few elite seasons because of injury and because he was old when he came up. And he's 32 years old, and he's on maybe the best 3-year stretch of any Yankee since Ruth. Yeah, maybe Mantle. Maybe you put Mantle. Mantle had some stretches there. That's incredible. Judge could slug 700. We have not seen that in the major leagues since, I think, Albert Bell maybe did it once in the 90s. I mean, and Barry Bonds, right? Who we can talk about. If you look at Barry Bonds' top seasons, like Judge's WRC plus, OPS pluses are on par, because the thing about, I mean, look, Bonds had the 4-year Bond stretch is, if we're not talking about steroids, the best hitting stretch of any player in Major League history, bar none. But it was also the strongest offensive era of modern baseball. And so those numbers, they get downgraded a little bit. Judge is is doing what he's doing in a pitcher's era, one of the strongest pitching seasons in 50 years. I think it's more impressive than what Bonds did, frankly. In part because of what I talked about variance, right? It's easier to stand out during when Bonds was playing. In part because of some of the steroid stuff, and just in part because it's a pitcher's era. This is not a good time.
You wrote that big article a couple of years ago after Judge's big season.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2022 is probably the best season of all time. Ruth had one season that once you do the adjustment I just talked about, you would pick his season. Judge is now better than 2022. And also if you look at, so Judge had the slow start, right? He starts the
terrible start. He was terrible in April. I thought I'm like, he's got to be hurt.
So let me just grab the numbers really quickly, because if you look at Judge since that terrible start, there's a day I like to cut him off at. So Judge, he had the terrible start, and then he bottomed out. He was hitting 174 in April. So this was 3 weeks in. He had hit, I think, 2 or 3 home runs. His numbers were really bad. So this is on April 22nd. So if we start at the bottom, we start the day after April 22nd, April 23rd, and we go to today. Aaron Judge has a 372 batting average, a 487 on base, and an 856 slug. If he continues at the pace he has been since that day, he will go down with unequivocally, no doubt, no Barry Bonds steroids caveats, the greatest offensive season in Major League history. And if that happens, I think you put him on Mount Rushmore. Peak Judge is better than peak DiMaggio. It's better than peak Gehrig. There's a couple of Mantle seasons we might want to put into this discussion, but I think it's better than peak Mantle. And so you're talking about Babe Ruth in the 1920s playing something that is barely recognizable as baseball today against all white players, and being the first guy to say, hey, maybe I should hit some home runs, right? Like, you're talking about contrasting Judge with that. I think it is the greatest achievement other than maybe Shohei Ohtani. Shohei Ohtani is like 22 seasons or something, or 23 seasons. I think it is the greatest achievement in sports in baseball in my lifetime. I think it's really incredible.
It's incredible. And let's hope it continues. EJ, as you can tell, I am not home. I'm at the beach. There's not air conditioning right now. It's hot. I'm sticking to my chair. And so we're going to wrap this up 3 minutes early because I'm getting very uncomfortable here on a hard wooden chair and I'm sweating to death here. So all good as always. I just love this show because I love the way you help change my thinking. I love how we look at baseball in different ways, and we both bring different perspectives. Angelo had some great points today as well. Everyone, thank you for watching the Start Spreading the News Yankee Show. We'll be back here again next Monday. We've never missed a Monday. 9 p.m. We're always here. Have a great week.